Today, I welcome Katie Wells, also known as Wellness Mama, to the show to talk about her new brand, Wellness, as well as tons of interesting stuff, mostly around how to be intelligent when raising a family. So this is something that I don't have any kids yet, but probably in the next few years looking at it. And Katie is just an absolute wealth of information on all things health, but so much so in raising a family as well. So this episode, it's actually one of my favorites that I've recorded so far this year, and you're going to learn a lot from this one, even if you don't have kids. It's still packed with information about skincare, what to avoid, but also just how to live a really healthy life, her fasting tips and tricks, and tons of good information in this episode. So tune in, and I hope you enjoy. This episode is brought to you by White Oak Pastures, a fully regenerative farm based out of Bluffton, Georgia. If you guys don't know how obsessed I am about regenerative agriculture, you probably haven't been around listening to this podcast for a long time. This is a type of farming that mimics natural ecosystems to restore the loss of soil, biodiversity, and best of all, pulling carbon out of the atmosphere. I recently actually just purchased a farm here in Texas to start learning about this myself, but White Oak has been around doing this for decades, and it shows in the research. They actually recently got a study done showing that for every pound of meat that you eat from White Oak Pastures, you're actually putting 3.5 pounds of carbon back into the soil. When you have this ecosystem where all the animals work together, you actually get carbon pulled back into the soil. Whereas the fake meat, Beyond, Impossible, et cetera, they put 4 pounds of carbon into the atmosphere. So if you're going to really do any sort of choice for the environment or for your own health, this is the way to do it. These are the types of farms to support. I love their products, and not only their animal products, which they have a bounty of, all the way from the classic chicken, turkey, pork, and beef, but also guinea, duck, rabbit, goose, etc. I mean, this is what it takes to have a regenerative model. And you can try them all today for 20% off with code NATURALSTATE. Just head to dranthonygustin.com/meat to check out some of my favorites. I love all their products, but one of my favorite is actually a wild card here. You probably wouldn't be able to guess, but it's their beef tallow body wash, which I use daily instead of soap. So if you want to try out some of the best regenerative meat on the planet, head to dranthonygustin.com/meat and use code NATURALSTATE for 20% off your order. This episode is brought to you by Element, or LMNT, which is an electrolyte beverage brand founded by Rob Wolf, Luis Villasenor, and Tyler Cartwright. 2 of 3 of those guys have actually been on the show to talk about why they started this company and their background in this space. But mainly they have worked with literally thousands of people. And these are some of the most qualified experts that I learned a lot from in the early days of when I was doing keto and helping research and help a lot of people. And the number one thing that these guys saw was that people were having an extremely hard time switching to low carb because they were simply not getting enough electrolytes. But as you guys know, I often complain about the supplement industry is full of absolute trash, that people using artificial ingredients, fillers, sugar, etc., and they could not find an electrolyte that met their standards, not only from lack of ingredients, but not having the highest amount of sodium, potassium, and magnesium that they thought needed to exist in certain ratios. So they launched Element, and I drink them myself daily. So I've been a long time user, basically since the first day they launched. And whenever I go back to eating keto or lower carb after eating moderate carbs, I need these things at least a couple times a day, or else I feel like crap. Especially in the summertime here in Austin, Texas, where it's 150 degrees every single day, and I'm working out outside, playing basketball, hanging out with friends, and sweating my face off. I typically have up to 4 of these in a day. My favorite is the citrus salt, which is the original one, but the raspberry and habanero are also my favorites as well. So if you guys want to hear more about Element and my favorites and why I use it, head on over to drinklmnt.com/TNSP. That's drinklmnt.com/TNSP. Katie, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to chat.
Oh man. So before we started recording, you were telling me that you're on day, was it 4 or 5 of a 7 to 10 day fast?
I am running on ketones and a few supplements right now.
And you're feeling great.
I feel phenomenal.
The longest fast I've done was 6 days. And by the end I was struggling and I was very happy to be eating, but you mentioned that you've done this enough where you feel pretty great. So what are some of the strategies that you've developed? in the past to make this one, I guess, less intense?
Yeah, well, great question. And I'll say to start off, I don't think that longer fasts are for everyone, especially for women. Like, you definitely need to be careful and work up and listen to your body. I started with really just 24-hour fast in the beginning, and then slowly tried 3-day and then 5-day. And I only do this long of one at the beginning of each year. And it's kind of my mental reset. And just a reminder, our family motto is we were made to do hard things. And I feel like starting the year like this just kind of helps center me. I also spend the time this year reading a few books that really center me, like The Four Agreements and Man's Search for Meaning, just getting my mental space good. I've found over time, it really helps to make sure I'm eating a really nutrient-dense diet and like kind of hyper-nourishing for the week before. And then I have a very specific plan going back into food, so I don't signal the body that there's any kind of starvation going on. And for a lot of my early fast, I would do strictly water, and only water, and sometimes salt. But I've been experimenting in my more recent ones with half a cup of black coffee in the morning, just for the mental. I feel so much better when I can just have a cup of coffee. And then experimenting with some non-caloric supplements to see the effects in a much more compounded way during a fast.
That's fascinating. So the nutrient dense loading period, is that like a lot of organ meats and fat, or how are you thinking about getting the body a lot of what it needs?
Exactly. So I think of food in terms of maximizing nutrients versus anything to do with calories at this point. And for the week or two before, I've been really delving into the research on organ meats, and specifically the anti-fatigue factors in liver. So I kind of preload by eating about a quarter pound a day of raw liver leading up to the fast. It is. It feels like taking the most amazing nootropic ever, though. I've done that a few days in a row before this, and just the energy that comes from that it blows caffeine completely out of the water. It's amazing.
Are you doing just beef liver, or are you switching up the animal sources at all?
Mostly beef liver. We just have a local friend who has grass-fed and grass-finished beef, and so I trust the source. And I'll just cut up like a quarter of a pound into swallowable amounts, and then just swallow a quarter of a pound a day.
That's my go-to source as well, is just swallowing it and not even trying to cook it and make it taste good, and then going through the chewiness and whatever. Like, I also did a lot of hunting this year, so I ground up all organs into grind with suet. And that's a palatable way. But yeah, I mean, you're trying to choke down a fourth a pound a day. I think just down the chute with some water is probably the most effective way. Are you doing any other organs besides liver?
I have started experimenting a little bit. My husband and my oldest son both hunt, and my son got his first deer this year. So we've had.
Nice. Congrats to him.
Yeah, we've had all the organs. He even processed it himself, and we've got all that in our fridge now. So I've been experimenting a little bit more, but just kind of really tracking. I do labs really often, and just kind of dialing everything in right now.
That is fascinating. So the supplements you're taking right now, what's going on with those?
Yeah. So when I'm not fasting, I have a whole regimen that I use, but everything is rotated. I'm very much of the belief that I don't like taking anything every single day. And so I like to rotate, and I don't take any supplements whatsoever on the weekends, just because I don't want my body to ever adapt to getting something exogenously versus if it's something that I'm supposed to make or get from food. On a fast, I'm a lot more careful. So I take binders like activated charcoal to support anything that is coming out through my gut. And then I also take some strains of probiotics and K27, which seems to really help with the fatigue during fasting. And then this time I've been experimenting with C60 in olive oil. So it's very minimal calorie, and I figure it's all fat. So I'm not worried about that breaking the fast, and it hasn't affected my blood levels at all. But I've seen amazing energy with that, even throughout having no calories for 4 days.
Are you seeing anything change with sleep? That's like one of the things that seems to go with me, like day 3 or 4. Has it been improving sleep at all?
It has. I haven't noticed a dip in sleep yet. I'm curious if I will maybe on day 6 or 7. If I have any sleep issues, it tends to be farther into the fast. But right now I'm getting 2.5 plus hours of deep sleep, and my HRV has stayed well above 100 through this. So I think my body's handling it really well. I'm watching that really carefully. And I think the C60 is also helping with sleep from what I can tell.
You have dialed in. This is what happens when you work on stuff for many years and you can't figure it out, huh?
Exactly. And I run spreadsheets and algorithms for all this data I've been tracking for so many years that I feel like I have a pretty good handle on my body. But anything public, I always say, don't take what I'm doing as medical advice. Always experiment, work with your own doctor, and figure out those variables for yourself. Because I certainly don't think what I'm doing will directly translate to anyone else and be the best method for them.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things that I've noticed, the major shift when people switch to a mindset of, oh, I need to do this thing to have this health outcome, to, oh, this is just a lifelong journey that you're going to go on and no one reaches just maximal health and they're done. I think that everybody in this space, be it, experts or people who are just starting out. I mean, it's a lifelong, you figure out what works for you. And the thing is too, like, your goals may change, your lifestyle may change, like what you want out of how you feel may change. And so, I mean, I think it's fascinating just to continually learn about it and accept that it's going to be a never ending journey.
Exactly. Yeah, that's such a good mindset.
So COVID over the last year, it's obviously been wild. You've done a lot of great stuff talking about family, raising kids, all this different stuff. Like, what has changed for you guys from the family perspective over the last, I don't know, what it's been 10, 12 months?
Yeah, it's certainly been a wild ride, I think, for a lot of families. And we were fortunate in that we already had a digitally distributed company and I already homeschooled my kids. And so not a lot of our day-to-day life changed. In fact, my kids will look back and remember 2020 as the year that their 2-week spring break turned into a 8-month spring break, and all of their friends were home in the neighborhood, and they literally spent time camping out in the woods and hunting squirrels and building foundries to melt aluminum. It was amazing for their creativity. On a personal level, when my kids started school, I started looking at the options and trying to evaluate what was going to best prepare them for adulthood in this extremely technological world, and realized that none of the existing options out there, whether it was even the best private schools or homeschooling, nothing I was finding seemed to actually prepare children well. And in a lot of ways, some of them seemed actually counterproductive to what would be helpful for kids going forward. So I built a curriculum from the ground up, which was skills up versus knowledge down, with the idea that kids in this generation will always have access to the entirety of human knowledge at their fingertips. We don't need to just throw information at them. We need to preserve the things that they are innately born with, like creativity, critical thinking, ability to ask hard questions and keep asking until they get the answers they want. So we built the whole curriculum on that and have been doing that model with our kids since the beginning. My thought had always been, when my kids are older, I'll actually spend time turning this into a tangible product other families can use, because I figured it would be about that long before people were receptive to a more virtual learning model and just more receptive to that type of education in general. And then 2020 hit, and I feel like it brought 2030 into 2020, and there's now nationwide widespread acceptance of virtual learning. I've heard from so many parents who are homeschooling for the first time out of necessity. So I've been spending a lot of my time the last 6 months building out that program to help other families.
So what is it kind of like, I know there's the unschooling. I'm just starting to learn about this stuff personally. My fiance and I are talking about, okay, timeline having kids probably within the next couple of years. So obviously this stuff's starting to spin in the back of my brain where I've just ignored it all until this point in life. So this is just what I'm naturally getting more curious about. So like, how do you think it's different from some of the other alternative homeschooling options right now?
Yeah, it's not quite unschooling at all, but it's pretty much a hybrid. I realized that when it came to the basics they need, there are tons of options available, everything from free options like Khan Academy up to, we've used some pieces from Ron Paul curriculum, which has a paid model, and some of those have been really good. But what I realized was the traditional education system was built on needing to keep kids busy for 8 hours a day. So it took a lot of knowledge and spread it out over essentially how it could take 6 months to a year to learn for children, and built around book knowledge and around a time-based kind of paradigm. And ours, it's more of geared towards mastery, not just proficiency, and not at all toward test taking. And so they are able to complete the basics. Obviously, children still need to learn how to read, and I'm a big fan of them becoming very proficient writers, because that translates into almost every career they could go into. And then math from the perspective of how to think, not just learning to solve equations, but how math works as a way for understanding complex problems and multivariable equations in life. So we've built everything around those basics. And that part is easy to do in about an hour a day. And then from there, we've curated a learning environment where they have the complete freedom to pursue any other interests beyond that. And I don't restrict screen time at all. My kids almost never, ever ask to watch TV because they're busy. Right now, they're all learning to play chess and competing with each other and building a chess club. And we've got 9 different science experiments going on in our house pretty much all the time. So the only 2 unlimited line items on our budget are books and learning materials. So if they have a project they're working on, they can come and get the materials anytime they need. And just trying to really support those things. I'm a big believer that entrepreneurs can help drive positive change in society. So we have a contract with them that before they can drive or have their own cell phone, they have to have a profitable business for a year. And our oldest at 14 has already done that. And the others are gearing up for it now. And that's been a way to teach so many hands-on skills and things like important, just basic life skills like financial management and how to keep up with a P&L and consistency, attention to detail. So much of that is built in, but it's hands-on and they see a tangible, measurable result as they work on something. And so it's been really fun as they get older to go through that with them.
So what is the business that the 14-year-old has?
He's actually had a couple. He has a podcast of his own that's about to launch, but he wrote a cookbook that released last year and has already been profitable for a year. In fact, they're selling 500 to 2,000 copies a week, which is relatively hard to do as an author. And he and his friends have done this as teenagers. So it's been really fun to watch.
What marketing channels are they using?
They have been entirely bootlegged and done it from the ground up. They are selling that many just on Amazon. We're actually not even tracking other channels, and they've done some outreach. They've done a few podcasts, but really they managed to launch at a time, do enough to get the Amazon algorithm going. And now it's just self-perpetuating.
What's the title to give a little plug here?
It's called Chef Junior.
Chef Junior. That's amazing. And what happens with the earnings? Does that just go into a little fund or whatever? They just decide whatever the hell they want to spend it on? How does it work?
He has opened his own account and he's building up his reserves in there from the royalties. And then we also walk them through real estate investing. So he's starting the process of buying his first investment house with the idea that over time he pays it off and then buys a second one, and both of those pay off the second house, et cetera. So he's got a mapped out plan for that. And it's also been funny to watch because the kids have Roth IRAs and he wanted to start managing his. He came to me at the beginning of COVID and asked if he could manage it. And it totally my fault. I was like, I don't know if you're quite ready to handle managing this yet. Maybe when you're older, let's start just doing some experiments and see, like tracking over time, what would happen. And he came to me a couple months later with a spreadsheet and had shown he would have basically more than doubled his IRA if he had been managing it. So I was like, you know what? You convinced me. You're in charge now.
You want to put it all in Bitcoin?
He didn't, although he knew intuitively at the beginning of COVID that Amazon and Zoom were going to be big plays. He's also very much a Tesla fan, so he's been watching that one pretty closely, but his gut instincts were right.
Man, this is amazing. When I have kids, this is what I want them to be doing and thinking of. So maybe I'll just follow you everywhere with your new program you're coming out. Like, how do you envision this being released? Like books, courses, online stuff, curriculums online? Like how do you envision it?
I'm working on it. The first release will be as an online course, and I'm pretty close to having that ready to go. And I'm realizing I had to resist the urge myself to try to turn it into a curriculum because it's basically an uncurriculum. And I'm spending a lot of time teaching parents to do less because often I think we just get in kids' way. And so it's reminding parents how to get out of their way, which also is much less time and stress for the parents. And then just how to build that learning environment so that it's pretty much constant in your house without you directly overseeing everything.
Interesting. So yeah, I mean, some of my biggest fears going into parenthood would be the drift towards screens, the drift towards, friends and influence around nutrition and other just lifestyle habits. Have you seen that? I mean, it seems to be not a problem. Is it like you guys have curated a little community around you, or you just lead by example and they figure that out on themselves? Like, how do you manage all that?
Some of both. We're very fortunate that they have a great peer group where we are. And also just by nature of having 6 of them, they have kind of built their own tribe that's become positive peer pressure. I'm very much a fan of just modeling behavior and then educating. I think we often underestimate how much kids are capable of understanding at a young age. So ours have almost no restrictions whatsoever on diet or screen time, short of an allergy or something. And we just do a lot of education. And then my philosophy is that when it comes to food in our house, I'm in charge of buying it and cooking it. So I cook healthy, whole foods all the time, and that's what's available. They can always choose to eat or not eat, but that's what's there. And then if they're outside of our home, I don't stress at all if they make different choices, but they really haven't ever wanted to. They have become so in tune with their bodies that they almost never really make junk food choices at all. And when they do, they don't feel great. And they've kind of learned from that. Same thing with screen time. It's not that we restrict it. It's just that they have so much else they'd rather do that they almost never have time to want to watch screens. But that said, like, we do have exceptions. We've, as a family, watched The Mandalorian this year and things like that. It just really isn't a focus in our house.
Interesting. So do you guys lead with example with that? Like, do you guys have a lot of hobbies and things like that? Are you working a ton? Like, how do you think about your behaviors besides nutrition, but more of like, here are the lifestyle choices I'm making throughout the day?
Yeah, very much so. I think as parents, they listen to some of what we say, but so much of what we do. And I've seen that in small ways. Like, I love art, and I have been into like a lot of different projects over the years. And if I sit down and do those things, so often they'll come sit down and do them with me versus me trying to just push them into art lessons. Or for a lot of years, I always kept trying to kind of encourage them to do music lessons because that was something I didn't do as a kid. And I wished I had. And I realized that I was sort of projecting that on them when really I was the one who wished I had done it. So I signed up for voice lessons and music lessons, and then they all got interested in it from seeing me do it. So rather than telling, just showing. Same thing with nutrition. Like, they obviously see all the crazy biohacking stuff we do, and they see us in the sauna every day, and they see all the supplement experiments on rotation, and they ask questions. And so now, as I've got teenagers, they're doing their own kind of health experiments. And we started pole vaulting as a family, for example, as a hobby. And they're having fun watching and dialing in how foods or supplements or sleep impact their performance. So now they have this tangible measure that they can see what's working and what's not working.
Well, this gives me a little more confidence that those used to be randomly astray and that I don't have to control everything, which again is like just a huge fear. So sounds like you just live like a normal human and set a good example, and it works pretty well.
Absolutely. In fact, I think it's easier on everybody when there's less restriction and less trying to control variables. I think that's a source of stress for students. And psychologically, as they get older, their job is to separate from the family. So rather than fight them on that, I'm trying to give them the tools and the foundation to do that in an effective, successful way, realizing that hopefully when they're older, there will be still that strong relationship and a friendship that develops. But in the meantime, they need to establish their own autonomy psychologically. Like, that's a very, very important step in the teenage years.
Yeah. Were you raised in a family that had a lot of autonomy and stuff like this? Or was it sort of a correction and you learned what you didn't want from that?
A little bit of both. My parents were great about giving us the academic and foundational financial skills, things like that. But they were definitely always a lot stricter with rules and what we were allowed to do and not do. And so it's been a little bit of an experiment with my kids, because I went through a wild phase in high school and college as a reaction to not being able to do things when I was younger. And so to avoid that, I give my kids very few restrictions. I've explained and talked through things like drugs with them very young, so they have an understanding and they're not enticed or afraid of them. And then when they want to do something that I think might still be a little above their maturity level, I tell them, convince me. Like, the burden of proof is on you. I think this is outside of your current level of maturity, but convince me. If I'm wrong, I'm open-minded and I'm happy to listen. And they come to me often with like 1 page written out whole arguments for why they think they're mature enough to do this and how they're going to mitigate any negative consequences. And quite a bit of the time, I end up letting them do it, and it ends up being a great learning experience. So I just think when we honor and respect their intelligence and their autonomy early on, they rise to that challenge.
Promising. It's great. Do you, were you on all of this sort of like health direction and all the things you're doing now when you first had your kids, or what got you on this track in the first place?
I wish so much that I knew then what I know now, but it's certainly been a now almost 15-year journey for me. In fact, having my first son, I think, is what catapulted me into autoimmune disease. So I had a 10-year battle with Hashimoto's, of which a lot of that was spent trying to figure out that I actually had Hashimoto's. And then since then, now I'm fully in remission and have no lasting effects. I don't take any medication from it. But I'm so grateful for that, because those health challenges led me into this research phase that built and basically birthed Wellness Mama. And that over time, I've learned so much more, and now I'm able to teach my kids. So it certainly was a journey and had a lot of ups and downs, especially downs. But I'm so grateful for the lessons. And I don't know that I ever would have gotten to the point I am now or been so invested in health had I not gone through that.
Yeah. It's wild. 10 years, huh?
Yeah, that was a long journey. And anything hormonal and thyroid, my heart goes out to anyone who's still in that, because it's very frustrating and it can feel like such an uphill battle for a long time.
What were some of the main ways that you corrected that for yourself? And again, caveat to, everyone has a very individual journey.
I started off just with my background in journalism and then nutrition, tackling that side first and really cleaning up my diet. I did the autoimmune protocol for a long time, did a lot of supplements. I was taking Nature's Roid for a while to give my thyroid a break to heal. And I had nodules on my thyroid for a lot of years as well. And I did all of that and still had some residual struggles and had a lot of trouble losing weight, which is very common with thyroid problems. And it wasn't until I addressed the inner mental side of it and addressed past trauma that I was able to move through that. So it really taught me the importance of that mind-body connection, and books like The Body Keeps the Score really explain the kind of the specifics of that. But I went through a 3-year journey of trauma recovery and working through the inner side. And that was the final key for me in resolving all the physical side.
Interesting. What did that look like practically?
I kind of threw everything possible at the wall, trying to figure out how to address that. So I did everything from traditional therapy to all kinds of alternative therapy, like physically related ones. And I think a lot of things over time helped a little bit. And then I had kind of some major breakthroughs during different types of therapy. Tapping was helpful for me for a while. But really, it goes back to learning how to ask better questions internally and then curating that over time. I realized for a lot of years, I was internally asking myself questions like, why is it so hard to lose weight? And the problem is our subconscious is so brilliant at protecting us that it answers whatever questions we give it. So my subconscious was going, well, obviously you've had 6 kids and you have thyroid problems, so of course you can't lose weight. And that was kind of the loop that was happening in my head. And what I realized when I started really paying attention to my inner voice and curating what I was saying to myself, asking better questions like, how is it so easy to lose weight? Or why do I love whatever the steps I was trying to take so much? It got so much easier. But I also had this script in my head that if only this, and this, then I'll be happy. If only I got back to this size and looked like this, then I'll be happy. And I realized one day that I could choose to be happy right now without any contingencies. And I could choose to love myself exactly where I was. And in that moment with that shift, it got so much easier to choose all of the things that I needed to do to get healthier. And I didn't feel like I was fighting myself anymore. So I don't think it's a silver bullet by any means, but I feel like that piece is often so ignored. And there's such a correlation with autoimmune disease and especially thyroid disease. I'm hearing from other women going back to some kind of stressful experience or trauma, either in childhood or at some point in their life. And that addressing that is one of the big keys to working through the physical problems.
Yeah, I mean, they're so interlinked. And like, not Body Keeps Score, a great book. We're starting to learn a little bit about it. But I think what makes it so challenging is that talking about earlier, having spreadsheets, charting stuff, getting labs for physical health. With the mental health stuff, you can't do that. You can't quantify it, and it makes it so confusing and so tricky to work through. I mean, I've gone through phases of my life too, where like, okay, great, that went well. Now I'm doing well, and then it's like this new wave thing comes later on and you don't even realize it until it's there. It's like, it's so challenging and foggy to be able to like quantify and work through these things. I think that at some point someday we'll have brain mapping, things like this, that will be able to quantify the stuff and be able to say like, oh, okay, yeah, this trauma is leading to this thing. And we do this thing to fix it. And there's like some promising stuff with neurofeedback right now, but yeah, we're still very much, I think, in bloodletting with leeches to physical health with where we're at in mental health right now.
I completely agree. And I'm hopeful too, that we're going to really see a focus on this in the next few years, but I'm with you. I don't think we have all the tools right now at all.
Yeah. I mean, it's been encouraging to see though, when maybe it's just culturally where I grew up, but in rural Minnesota, the Midwest, like nobody would even talk about any of this stuff. Like nobody even went to therapy. Like this was something that we're talking right now the integration between trauma and mental health and physical health and how it affects your body, and that, there's solutions, people can work through it. And that is a far cry from where I grew up. And it was like, you were broken and you were a freak if you went to any sort of therapy. And it's like, at least from where I grew up and like where that was 20 years ago, like there's been an enormous shift there. So I feel pretty good about the direction, but I think we have a lot of work to do for sure.
Yeah, exactly. And I think we're going to also even see the science of those connections over time. I mean, on a very basic level, if you have some kind of past trauma that's making you feel profoundly unsafe in your own body and you're existing in a sympathetic nervous system state all the time, it's very hard to rest and digest or have fertility or lose weight because the body doesn't prioritize any of those things when it thinks it's in danger. And so I think the more we learn to connect those sides, the more we're going to see much better results in the medical community and the physical aspects of health as well.
Yeah. So, you've turned a lot of this self-exploration into a very entrepreneurial support. You're talking about how you encourage this with your kids. And I 100% agree that, it's just, I think of being an entrepreneur sort of like being able to be really good at providing humanity with value. And you can obviously do that if you're not making businesses, but I think is the best way to do so. So just curious, sort of like when you learned that skill, if it was before, if it was going through this journey, like sort of the learnings there.
It was very much self-taught for me after college and through a lot of reading, and then with Wellness Mama being very first and foremost a mission-driven project for me to help support other women and moms, but also realizing that there was a business component and that, like I tell my kids now, if you want, like, wealth should be connected to value and it should be connected to solving big problems for other people. So to the degree that you can find big problems and solve them and improve humanity, you will find that is like a tangible financial payoff as well, which is why I'm with you. I think entrepreneurs have incredible power to improve society. But I had to learn all of that from the ground up. And I came out of college probably very risk averse just based on my upbringing, and had this sort of traditional model that you get a job and you're going to save for retirement, and had to sort of question those things over and over and dismantle them and then build a new structure around entrepreneurship, and realizing there's a lot of security there that you don't find in other types of careers. Certainly some downsides too, and it's not always an easy road, but very much self-taught through all of that, and we're very grateful for that journey as well.
Yeah, this is like a very strange thing. Like I think it's like so easy not to do this. Like there was this guy I know, there's a YouTuber who is a doctor, recently graduated doctor in practice, and he started a YouTube channel. It went really well, and he made $1 million this year doing a YouTube channel at his house. It's like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 30 years ago, the same amount of production that he's able to do on his own with the internet would have been 30, 40, 50 people, and raised tons of money to get this sort of output. And so I think like the general consensus hasn't caught up to the fact that everybody can sort of be their own creator and focus on their own little craft and probably be more entrepreneurial than they think. And this is the thing too around, we're talking about how mental health has a component with, you don't feel safe, you don't feel secure, therefore your physical health can't get there. I was chatting with a friend this morning around, there's like these levels of sort of like having a job that people hate is like most of the country. Most people that I know who have jobs hate them and don't want to do them. And I'm not saying everybody who has a job and has a salary doesn't like their life. That's not true at all. But there's just a lot of weird holes that people get stuck in where they just grow up. They don't know anybody. They go to school, they go get a job, and they just are doing the same thing over and over. And I think that like that stress of not enjoying your life causes a lot of negative health consequences. Addiction, drinking too much, escaping on the weekend, like watching too much TV, being sedentary, checking out, looking at your phone. And so like, I also think that the access to entrepreneurial lifestyles allows a lot of people to focus on, like you did, value-driven work that, maybe it's a great business where they, make a lot of wealth, but maybe it just pays the bills, but they're actually doing something that they care about. It's a huge thing too for both mental and physical health.
For sure. And that's one thing I've tried to be cognizant of as an employer now as well. We have a pretty big team with Wellness Mama and with our other company, Wellness, and realizing just like in family, so much is based on what we curate as the culture. And so trying to translate that into business as well and kind of let our employees be part of the entrepreneurial mission and mindset and give them those same things we give our kids of respect and autonomy and focus toward a goal. And so we've created a really unique culture there, I think. And my hope and what I believe from talking to my employees is they don't feel like employees, and they certainly aren't doing a job they don't like. They're helping us work to a mission. So I think the other side of that is as entrepreneurs and employers, we can help really curate a work environment that lets everyone on the team feel valuable because they are valuable to a mission and not just that they're kind of handcuffed to a job that they hate. And another thing I found, really one of the more profound things I've ever done that led to a lot of the shifts for me and to the entrepreneurial world, is to every year kind of question everything. I actually keep a list of things I think I believe. And my goal every year is to question and challenge those things line by line. I'm a really big fan of Charlie Munger's idea that you earn the right to have an opinion by knowing the other side better than someone who might oppose you. And also the idea from the 4 agreements that many of us enter adulthood with these kind of unspoken agreements or pre-programming in our heads of things we believe that we've never really hashed out or we don't even fully understand. And so I wanted to be very intentional about that. So every year I go through that list, and it's gotten shorter and shorter over time, but questioning some of those things, like the idea that saving for retirement and a traditional job is the best path, or even some of these physical things that I thought I believed. It's been really helpful and a really fun exercise. I've just finished kind of doing that for the beginning of this year.
Yeah, I have an extremely rigorous review process that I actually sent out my newsletter a couple of weeks ago, and it sucks a lot of times to do that sort of reflection. And this is the thing too, that it's very uncomfortable to continuously face maybe where you've changed your mind or you've invested into an identity or a lifestyle that then now you have to basically start from scratch. Or I may have been wrong about something, or I could have been better this way. It's not necessarily fun to do those reviews sometimes. I find it a struggle, and then with anything that's hard in life, when you get through it, just like a hard workout or anything like that, it feels great on the other side. It's just that intimidation of facing yourself, but going through it, I think is really challenging for a lot of people.
Absolutely, for sure. Yeah.
Speaking of entrepreneurial stuff, you were talking about before like maybe taking the curriculum and making some sort of course for it. But also you launched last year a business as well. It's very different from what you were doing before with Wellness Mama. So just curious as far as like where you got the idea for the business and how that's been going.
It's been our first real jump into the consumer packaged world and into physical products. It's gone really, really well, especially considering starting in the middle of COVID. And the goal with that one, I realized a couple of years ago that even my most naturally minded friends they might eat completely organic and they have natural products in their whole house, but they were still using certain conventional personal care products because it was important to them that they looked and smelled and felt a certain way in those areas. And I realized that those were actually also some of the products that contained the worst offenders. So if you were going to look at this from an 80-20 perspective, they were still getting 80% of their toxins from those 20% of products. And I kind of set out to tackle that. For years before, I had DIY recipes on wellnessmama.com for all of those products, and I still have those. But I realized if we were going to get a widespread shift and acceptance in choosing better options, that they would want a convenient pre-made product. So I set out to tackle the worst offenders first, which were hair care and toothpaste. And those were the ones that it seemed like most people still tended to use conventional alternatives for because there just weren't any spectacular natural ones. So our goal with that I feel like accomplished very well from the beginning, was to create products that didn't just work as well as conventional, but outperformed them, and that didn't just have no toxic ingredients. Because to me, that should be a given. That should be the baseline, is that it doesn't contain anything harmful. But when we think of the idea of so much of what you put on your skin is absorbed into your body, then obviously you don't want to put anything harmful. But beyond that, why not put beneficial things in those products so that you're actually getting something positive from the outside in as well? So we formulated shampoo, conditioner, dry shampoo, and toothpaste fully from the ground up that were basically skin and hair food, containing things that nourish the scalp and lead to healthier, stronger hair over time, and that don't have a lot of the like harsh chemical detergents that a lot of shampoos have. People don't realize that your hair doesn't actually need detergent at all, but most shampoos have really harsh detergents that strip proteins and oils from your hair over time. And so ours are more of a hair food. They still get the hair just as clean, but they feed the hair and the scalp from the outside in so that over time you're getting stronger hair follicles, and that leads to less hair fall. So you end up with more hair at any given time, which makes your hair thicker. So we really went from the ground up with that. Same thing with toothpaste, really revolutionizing. Your mouth doesn't need to be fully sterilized in the way that a lot of toothpaste do because you have an oral microbiome. So instead, choosing to support the oral microbiome kind of in the similar way that you would take probiotics and prebiotics for your gut, but by giving it different compounds that support the good bacteria and that target specifically bacteria like strep mutans that causes cavities without disrupting that oral microbiome, and that also contain minerals like hydroxyapatite, which is the bioavailable form that is used in the enamel, so that you get whiter, healthier teeth over time, but without any of the need of the chemicals or the really harsh products that a lot of toothpaste have.
Yeah, I mean, I've had Andy Nyla on the podcast before talk about what people don't understand with this stuff. And it's mind-boggling to me how much people, like you said, that go through this process of doing everything they can to be healthy, but then still have these blind spots. And this is, like you said, a huge one. So, I mean, you briefly touched on it, but I'd be curious if you can expand a little bit more on some of the downsides to using the products that have the laundry list, crazy amount of chemicals in them, be it for toothpaste or hair care.
Yeah, like I said, so much we know now the majority of what we put on our body gets absorbed into the bloodstream, and certainly that's true in the mouth. That's why we have medications that can be entirely sublingual. You put them under your tongue and they hit the body very quickly. So when we're talking about toothpaste and something we're using 2 to 3 times a day in the mouth, those even small amounts of really harmful ingredients build up over time. And a lot of toothpaste have sweeteners that you actually wouldn't want in your mouth. A lot of them have bleaching agents that are really, really harsh on the oral microbiome, and also that can be harsh on the gums, and then have all kinds of host of artificial colors and dyes and flavors and things you wouldn't necessarily want. Also, in doing the research for this, I found that there is, almost think of it like a scale when it comes to bacteria balance in the mouth. And if you go too far in one direction, you're at a higher risk for gingivitis. And if you go too far in the other direction, you're at a higher risk for cavities, because there's different types of good bacteria that keep both of those in check. And when you kill too much of one, you put yourself at risk for the other, and vice versa. And so most toothpaste might target, if they're anti-cavity, they might target the bacteria linked to cavity. Or if you have gingivitis, they might be like overly harsh towards those bacteria. But then the unintended consequences, you can put yourself at higher risk for getting the other problem. And so the approach of taking a whole mouth microbiome type approach helps to balance out that bacteria in both directions, which lets the microbiome balance and equalize over time. So you're not constantly having to fight a battle on either of those sides.
Yeah, it's just insane to me that this is another example of stuff that people put in their bodies where it's just normalized. Some of this is just the way it has been. That's how we grew up. And it like foaming a certain way and tasting a certain way. It's like, that's what you expect. So that if you switch to something else that doesn't have those things, your brain goes, oh, this isn't making my mouth clean anymore. And I think that's like the biggest thing that people switching to any alternative options. Again, I don't know if you guys have any solutions for those things, but it's like a mental hurdle to accept that this thing is working as good as the thing that people are used to.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And we were very careful to very closely mimic the mouthfeel or the like suds feel in the shampoo, because we realized that with people that certainly there may be powders that work really, really well for teeth, but a lot of people have trouble with that switch to a tooth powder or to the texture of it. And we realized we could create a lot of the same reaction and same feel that people are used to, but using much gentler ingredients that were beneficial instead of harmful. I think there's also we didn't skimp at all on any of the ingredients, and I was really rigorous with our sourcing. I think a lot, especially massive companies, as they get to scale, they're able to save so much money by using less expensive ingredients, and that just ends up not being as great for our health.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So what about for people's hair and the quality of typical shampoo or conditioner?
Yeah, so ours does lather. It doesn't lather quite as much as some of the really strong conventional shampoos, but it does lather and it does get hair to feel as clean as regular shampoos. What was fascinating to me when I researched hair care is that there are a lot of cultures around the world who would be really shocked at the idea of us using any kind of harsh soap or detergent on our hair every single day. Because like I tell people, your hair's not dirty laundry. You don't need to use detergent on it. But yet if you're used to that, there's going to be a little bit of an adjustment period while your hair kind of gets renourished because it's going to be taking in all of those minerals and nutrients that are in the shampoo. But we realized that we could still get, with very gentle soaps that didn't strip away the oils, get a lot of the same feel, and then put in ingredients like nettle, which is actually shown to help improve hair follicles and hair thickness over time, so that those things are sitting on the scalp and in the hair, even after you've shampooed it, so that over time you're getting your hair a lot healthier. But most shampoos are largely just water with a lot of artificial scents and then a harsh detergent added. So they're not doing anything beneficial for your body. And then you're also putting some pretty harsh things on your body for most people once a day. And so we found, like I said in the beginning, by changing out oral care and hair care, we've got others in the pipe as well, that's kind of very much an 80-20 approach to personal care. And most people use those products, even if there's a lot of variation in skincare and that kind of thing, but most people use those two products. So if we could give people a really sustainable, easy, natural solution that worked as well, that we could get people to make that lifestyle shift and get rid of 80% of that exposure from personal care.
Yeah, I mean, it's wild. So I've begged Andy for a while to come out with a body wash, and he just hasn't gotten out yet. Do you guys have any interest in doing a body wash? Right now, I'm using one from White Oak Pastures, the beef tallow one, but the smell, I have to say, is not the greatest. And I think it could be a little bit better of a product, even though I think it's one of the best ones that I can find so far. So curious as far as, one, are you guys doing a body wash? Maybe you can't disclose, but are you doing one? Two, if you're not, what are some alternatives people can use now instead of body washes and scrubs?
That is definitely in the pipeline for us. What we found, we don't market it as such, but the shampoo, because it's skin microbiome friendly, actually works really well as a body wash and soap as well. And I even use it for shaving because it's gentle and natural enough that it works really well as a shaving aid as well.
What else is in the pipeline that you can disclose? Secrets?
So I'll be the first to mention it here. We have a probiotic deodorant coming out next year. Same idea of addressing the microbial balance versus just fighting bacteria with harsh chemicals. And I'm really excited because that one outperforms any other natural deodorant I've ever tried, and without all the itching and irritation that a lot of them seem to have. And then a natural sunscreen before summer. I'm actually not a huge fan of using sunscreen every day, and I don't encourage people to just lather on the sunscreen. I think we need the sun. But if we're spending more than our baseline amount of time outside where we're going to burn, I think sunscreen can be a great option. So we've developed a completely natural sunscreen that also helps nourish skin and protect it from sun damage.
Are you doing a zinc oxide based one, or how are you thinking about formulation?
It's a non-nano zinc oxide. And then we've got some other kind of proprietary stuff we've been working on as well that are being used more in Europe, but that work and give an extra level of protection and also seem to really nourish the skin so you don't get dried out.
Interesting. Awesome. What have been the biggest things that you have been, I guess, surprised and or challenged by moving from sort of the information-based business to a CPG-based business? So people who don't know what that word means, it's consumer packaged goods. I have certainly learned a lot in the last 4 years doing Perfect Keto and Equip and a couple of other companies. Just curious, like how your journey has been over the last year.
It's certainly a learning curve. I think in the digital world, it's easy to get spoiled because when I think of an idea, I can execute and make it happen almost instantly in the digital world. And in packaged goods, there's such a long lead time and so many rounds. Like with our toothpaste, to perfect it, I think we went through 97 rounds of formulation until we got it exactly how I wanted it. And there's so much more time and work on the physical side that goes into that before you ever get a product to market. It's certainly really fun. And I've gotten to learn the whole numbers world and realizing with digital products, you have great margins because you have very little overhead. With physical products, you have to be very careful about your margins and knowing your cost of every single piece that goes into it. And so that's been, to circle back to the kid thing, it's been really awesome to learn that and to let my kids get to watch that process as well. And kind of learn math through calculating margins. And my oldest is 14 and he's actually the environmental officer for the company because he's so interested in that world and in sustainability. That he truly knew more about that than I did. And he's been able to keep us in check and make sure that everything we were doing lined up and was good for the environment and not just for people.
Yeah, it is tough to go from online stuff. I mean, even with when I was in my clinic, having a service-based industry, going to a fast-growing packaged good, it's like people think that, it's like growth is great and the products, must have a high margin. But yeah, I mean, it's very hard to run a successful business and have any money left over to do any growth or pay employees well or anything else. So you're doing well. I'm sure that your past has set you up for success here, but kudos taking on as a challenge. It's been obviously a lot of work.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a great learning curve, and I'm excited for this year and for our new products and to get to keep growing.
What else is on your plate as far as, the changes from last year? You said before, basically 2030 moved up. And I think that happened for not just education, but for a lot of different areas in life, given COVID and all of the craziness that's been going on last year. So any other big ways your life is changing moving forward?
Certainly still much less travel than, I think in 2019, I was on a plane something like 80 times. And then last year, almost not on a plane at all. So I'm hoping we can find a balance and maybe there will be some travel again this year. But another thing I love to do, and it's top of mind since it's the beginning of the year, is to find a few out of comfort zone activities and make those a goal to tackle. And so in 2020, that was things like I always had a script that I wasn't an athlete and I wanted to tackle that. And so I signed up to train alongside some Olympians where we are locally who are training in pole vaulting and to do their entire training program without missing a day. So I'm still in the middle of that. And it's been so much fun, and to get to kind of reprogram that filter in my head that I'm not an athlete. And voice lessons were another one for me. I couldn't sing, and that was the story in my head. So I challenged myself to overcome that. The one that's currently on the horizon for the spring is stand-up comedy, because it's truly the most terrifying thing I could think of. I don't consider myself naturally funny, so I've signed up to do that, and I'm actually going to be part of a documentary and then have to perform in Vegas. So currently a little terrified of that one.
Amazing. Can I get tickets?
Absolutely.
The singing thing, that's interesting. Have you been musically inclined? You said you didn't take lessons before, but try to get your kids on it. But is it something like a goal that you always wanted to do music?
It is. And it's one that didn't come naturally. I wouldn't consider myself really musically inclined. In fact, probably the opposite. My parents are both legally deaf, and thanks to technology, they can hear much better now than when I was a kid. But I grew up largely in a silent home because they couldn't hear a lot of stuff. So we didn't have music on really until I was a teenager, and I got interested in it. And we even signed a lot in our house. So I just didn't have early exposure to music really, and didn't ever really develop that. And I didn't even know going into voice lessons if it was going to be possible to develop as an adult. And if my brain could learn that, because I went in the first day and told her, like, I literally know nothing. I have no idea if I am on key. I don't really even understand a lot of this stuff. And, if I'm terrible, just tell me now and I won't waste your time, but I'm willing to put in the effort and work. And to see that and see improvements, it's been one of the harder things I've done from an improvement perspective, but so worthwhile and so fun to get to see the results.
It's awesome. Well, you are inspiring not only kids, but everyone else. And your journey has been super fun to watch over the past few years. So keep it up. You've changed the world around you. Really appreciate it. So where can people find all the stuff that you're doing? Obviously you mentioned a lot on the show today, but curious.
Yeah, I'm universally almost everywhere Wellness Mama. So wellnessmama.com is the main hub. And the podcast is also the Wellness Mama podcast, and then social media, Wellness Mama on all of those. And the products are at wellness.com. That's wellness with an E on the end.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me. You're so much fun to talk to.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Natural State Podcast. Hope you enjoyed it. And if you did, I'd really appreciate you heading over to whatever service you're listening to this podcast on, dropping me a 5-star review and your thoughts on the show. This helps us get discovered by more people and spreading the good gospel of health. And if you want to stay plugged into all of my self-health experiments, recent research and books that I'm reading and my interpretations of those things, products that I'm testing, and thoughts on all things related to health, check out my free weekly newsletter called The Feed. You can sign up for that at dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. That's dranthonygustin.com/thefeed. Thanks again for tuning in and your support of the Natural State Podcast.